allow you to kick off a little bit in your own words. We just heard very fancy titles, but it would be good to get to know you. Maybe you could introduce yourselves briefly to our audience, and Kelly, I might come to you first. Maybe throw in a little bit of what's something your team would say you're best known for.
Oh, lovely. Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, it seems like this is a high energy room, which is really exciting. I'm Kelly Jones. I'm the Chief People Officer at Cisco. And that's Cisco with a C, the technology company, not the S, food company, because we have two. If you were to ask my team, I think they would say two things, and I do ask them, so I know these are the two things they would say. Number one is that I don't lead with a lot of ego, and I expect my team not to lead with a lot of ego, because I do feel like your ego is your enemy in many cases. You know, when you're trying to do good work for a company, it always has to be about your customer. Whether that customer is external or internal, it is never about you. But I also think they would say I have a tendency towards impatience. I'm just being honest. There are moments where I do tend to want things to go maybe a little faster. I love to experiment, and my team, I think, loves and hates that at the same time because it creates complexity. But I think those are the two big things they would say. Low ego, high impatience.
I like it. Humility with a little bit of impatience sprinkled in. Kerry, for you, same question in terms of setting yourself up and giving us a little flavour for who you are, but for you, how about what energises you about work at BP?
Brilliant, thanks Holly, and great to be here. It's an awesome room, so many faces. I think this is probably the biggest conference I've ever been at. But thank you, I'm Kerry, and I lead people, culture and communications at BP, which is kind of a wide range of activities across our company which touch the various aspects of the employee experience, and I think we'll come on that in a short while. But BP is an energy company. We operate in 60 countries around the world, and I think the thing that really energizes me, honestly, is two things. One is our people, and I think that's an easy thing to say, but genuinely, I really love the people in our company. In fact, here in the US, I've had the opportunity yesterday to visit with some of our folk. We have 800 just in Colorado, and actually it's about a third of our company works across the US. So they're pretty awesome. But also, the different countries we operate in, we do a lot of work also to impact the communities we operate in. Not just in terms of producing energy for those countries and for the world, but also impacting their organisations and communities socially as well as economically, and that ranges across a whole range of things, whether it's education, health, other aspects. So for me, there's huge amounts of purpose in what we do as well.
Awesome. Part of why I'm so excited to have you both here is, as I mentioned in the introduction, you're leading large organisations, and you've been doing so in a time where the role's really transforming. You know, whether we call it CHRO, whether we're calling it CPO, whatever the name for that functional title is in your organisation, it does feel like it's dramatically changed. Kelly, I want to come to you first. Talk to us about how you've seen it evolve, and particularly, I guess, in this moment, how you're watching it evolve again.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've been in my role coming up on 3 years, and I remember when I was interviewing for this role, speaking with the previous person who had it, and I was having the conversation about what to expect. And she said something to me that kind of stuck with me, and if there are any CHROs in the room, this will resonate. Expect everything. You know, it's a little bit like that movie, Everywhere, Everything, All at Once, I think is the title. And I think that's for everybody who works on people teams nowadays. If you work in people and talent, it is everything, everywhere, all at once. But the biggest evolution that I've seen over the last couple of years is definitely around the roles that CHROs are playing in influencing business strategy versus just people strategy. And certainly we play that operations role for the people strategy for the company, but I think there's been a bit of a recognition that you can't disaggregate culture from business performance. And so I think when people saw that over the last few years, the role of the CHRO or the CPO or the head of HR, whatever you call it, and the HR teams in general have definitely elevated. You know, we're more of the conversation, we're more in the conversation about the business strategy. I also think that this culture thing, you can't overstate it. Part of the reason I love your role and the way it's set up is, you know, this idea that I don't believe that HR necessarily owns the culture of the entire company. Because culture is how we feel about our work on Sunday night. What is the feeling you get before you get up and go to work on Monday morning? You know, when somebody asks you about your job, do you like your job when you see your family? That's culture. How does culture show up for you every day? But we are huge influencers on that culture. And we're a little bit of the North Star or the moral compass for our leaders, CEO, our ELT, and below that, around what we need to be doing with regards to our culture to build the workplaces that our employees can thrive. And so I've seen that definitely come into more prominence over the last couple of years as well. And we've always known that. I just don't know that everyone else has.
And Kira, that resonates with something you said to me the other day, which is it feels like our influence has significantly expanded.
Yeah.
We're custodians of a lot more inside the organisation than we might have been 5 years ago.
Yeah, completely. And I agree with all of the comments that Kelly's made, because I think culture is really important. I've been in this job for 5 years now, in the company 15, and if I reflect on how my role's evolved during that time, as well as the role of my predecessor, you know, it's significantly different. And I put some of that down to COVID, actually. I think we all started to see a bit of a shift because during the time of the pandemic, people needed us more than ever. And actually, we had a really strong role to play in making sure our people remained safe. We took care of them and we kept the companies running. And certainly, at BP, the need of my role has really evolved as well. So, you know, I touched on the question of employee experience, and that's really how my job specifically, and I think I see this in a number of companies, has evolved. And it's really all about different aspects that impact that experience. So for us, it's not just the communications, because I do think comms, both internally and externally, are all about, you know, creating the right environment for people internally. But it's also about real estate. I have in my remit health and well-being. I lead a lot of the group-wide transformation efforts that we have. So it's all about what is it that we need to do to create the right environment, to bring people to work, to make sure that they're enjoying what they do and they're delivering and focusing on performance. And it's that performance that we need in order to deliver the strategy.
Kelly, one of the things I know we spoke about the other day is AI and how AI is being embraced at Cisco, but also the work that your function's now thinking about how to do with regards to specifically something you think is underserved, which is this piece around equipping leaders. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, how you're approaching it as a business?
I can, and so that took how many minutes? Everywhere, you know, this is a conversation.
We're grappling with it, aren't we? And that's part of why it comes up so early in conversation. I think
Exactly.
Very resonant in the room how challenging this is to wrap our heads around and what it means for people.
You're exactly right. And it's interesting, we just released an AI readiness study at Cisco, and that study said that although 92% of companies fully recognize the power of AI and the need to have it and to ensure that they're implementing it into their product systems and tools, only 18% of companies feel ready. And when we think about that, I actually think that's not just the technology. Technology is certainly part of it. But when we think about what's coming with this and the role that we're going to play, and everyone in this room will play in your respective positions in HR, there's an opportunity to really take our workforces through this change. This is probably, so we've all been alive in what's known as the knowledge economy. We're transitioning into the innovation economy. And so this is you can't really underestimate what this is going to do to the workplace and to jobs. And so those of us in this room will be the ones that bring our business through it. And when I think about that, only 18% feeling ready, it's partly technology, but I think it's also partly leadership. If you think about leadership, I spend a lot of time thinking about people leaders, talking about leadership, and I have a self-admitted bias that I believe that if you get leadership right, you can solve a lot of things in your culture. You know, you can solve a lot of things with regards to how you recognize and reward employees. Leaders are the cultural ambassadors. They're the heartbeat. These line leaders are the heartbeat for our company. You know, we have 90,000 employees at Cisco. I think we have close to 12,000 people leaders. If we could make every single one of those leaders one of the best leaders in the world, think about the impact to both the experience our teams are having, but ultimately to our customers. And so we're looking at leadership largely as one of the things that is going to need to change dramatically, because leaders are going to have to lead in a very different way, and ironically, in a deeply human way. This technical transformation is causing leadership to become a more deeply human skill set. And I'm thinking of it almost through the lens of this concept of a super leader, where we're going to need leaders to have some different core things. We're going to need them to be philosophers. And so I know this sounds strange, but if you think about these leaders, they're going to be determining when to use AI, how to use AI, the ethical reasons around it, how to lead these blended teams that are human and agentic, and ultimately, in many cases, humanoid teams. And sometimes when I say that, people get a little twitchy, but it is coming, and it is coming in some of these industries. So this takes a very different type of leader to understand how to lead in that environment. But we also need our leaders to be hugely empathic, because if you think about the change curve for this, you cannot underestimate the change curve for what it's going to be like to take our humans and our ecosystem through this. So having a level of empathy and being able to understand what's happening with your teams and leading with that empathy is important. There's also an element of technologist. You know, we don't need every leader to be a deep technologist that can program a Python, but everybody's going to have to up-level their game with regards to technology.
Need to be more literate, aren't they? Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a lot of things I see in leadership dramatically changing.
Kelly, can I ask, you mentioned earlier you love experimenting. Sometimes this conversation, I think, can feel so overwhelmingly large, like kind of where do I start?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of like a leadership experiment you're running at Cisco now to begin working out this path for your organization in this space around leadership?
Sure. We have a couple, and one that I'm probably the most excited about is this concept of AI coaching. And if anyone's, who's had a coach? Raise your hand if you've had a coach. I want to, okay, good amount of people. So I've had a career coach for probably the last, different ones, for probably the last 6 years. Hugely beneficial having a career coach. And if you think about this idea, and our CIO at Cisco says this, I'm going to quote him, this is not my idea, but I love it, so I might, for this room, I'll just steal it. He says, wouldn't it be great if every employee at Cisco got treated like the CEO? Had a coach, had a comms person, had an admin, had you know, someone that surrounded them with that support, how much more they could get done. And so AI coaching is one that we're looking at, and we're doing it on teams that we have really good productivity metrics for, where we can understand, you know, what is the uplift. So our TAC is a good example, which is our customer support center. We know exactly we have customer satisfaction metrics, we have productivity metrics. So rolling something like this out, and I love that you asked this question, because just picking something and experimenting, this is an opportunity to think a little bit like a scientist. Try it, test it out, see what works, learn, and then recalibrate. But coaching is one that I'm particularly excited
Well,
about.
for those who were here listening to Adam Grant yesterday, that was one of his big encouragements here on main stage. You know, start innovation sprints, have a go, you know, be out there. Right now, he was like, I'd be doing an innovation sprint next week. You know, that's an example of something you could be trying and experimenting with. Kerry, as I'm listening to both of you talk about how the roles are evolving, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is how's that challenged you as a leader yourself? I think about the new muscle that you have to build to take in a very different role now to maybe a couple of years ago. Can you talk to us about either something you've had to let go of, or maybe a new capability you've had to build muscle in?
Well, I think it's been a lot actually. Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is the last 5 years, what I've learned is what got me here isn't certainly going to get me there. I mean, I know that's a phrase that people use glibly, but I personally have found it to be true. And for me, you know, number one, it's all been about resilience and courage. You know, there's been so many waves of different things, not just the pandemic, but, you know, in our industry, changes, you know, geopolitics, economical issues, you know, there's just been one thing after another. So resilience and courage, for sure. But beyond that, for me personally, I mean, I always thought for many years through my career, you know, I'd just work a bit harder, work a bit faster, be a bit more driven, and that would get me where I needed to go. And, you know, to be honest, it served me for quite some time.
It kind of works till it doesn't, right?
It works till it doesn't. I do remember having a conversation with a coach one day, and he said to me, eventually you'll get to a point where you feel like you're just pushing uphill, and you realise that rock's got so big you just can't push it anymore. And now I realise what he was trying to tell me. But all of that said, through the pandemic, I actually had some health challenges. I had a cancer experience, and I really got to a point where I had to sit there and think, do you know what? Something's got to give here, and something's got to change. And so what I realised was I had to slow down to speed up. You know, I've got to take time to pause, time to reflect, and just step back when I'm in the moment, rather than rushing ahead and trying to solve everybody's problem for them. I know I do that in different ways now. It sounds a bit kind of glib, but you know, I try and be a bit more mindful. I was joking with my team the other day because I just became a beekeeper.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so when I'm having a moment and I need to
Go off for the bees and honey.
get out there to my garden, and you have to be respectful. You've got to be in the moment, otherwise it's going to all go bad. So little things like that. But I think the bottom line is it's important to take the time to make space, both to think, reflect, and to take care of yourself.
Does everyone love too that the CPO found a way to bring accountability into mindfulness? Like, there's some real accountability around making sure you're present with the bees there.
For sure, absolutely.
No, I love that, and thank you so much for sharing it. I'm watching you nod down the end there, Kelly. What would you add into the mix in terms of how you've had to evolve your own leadership to accommodate the scope and growing influence of the function?
Yeah, well, all of that resonates, first of all.
Yeah.
I will just say that there is an element of, also being able to take care of yourself and use that time to recharge. But the thing that I really have had to let go of, though, is I'm a planner, and I'm a big believer in having plan A, plan B, plan C when those plans don't work right. I've had to kind of let go of this concept that I can have a 5-year plan. And if you think about it, we're living in a world of daily news cycles where you wake up every morning and it's exhausting. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's exhausting. I like to think that I'm a relatively informed person, but so much is happening. Just the time to understand it from a geopolitical standpoint and the implications on all of our businesses, from a technology standpoint, every day there's so much coming at you. And so rather than looking in this horizon of the 3 to 5 year plan is this, what I realize is I almost have to say, well, if this happens, this is my plan. If this happens, this is my plan. You almost have to scenario plan for multiple things. I'm starting to feel like I'm whoever it was that invaded the beaches of Normandy. I can't remember who the guy was, but it feels like that's happening in this role. So I've had to let go of this idea that you're going to have a plan that goes out that far, because I don't know how many of you start an annual plan and then get to the end of it, and how much of that stuff did you actually do? Because the stuff that happens in the 12 months, even in a normal environment, is wild. And then layer in the environment we're all living in now, it's very difficult. So that agility to just understand you're never going to have that long term of a horizon and do multiple scenarios, if this, then that, I think has become really
The much more dynamic planning in that way. And I think that links as well to the point both of you have made around how do you look after yourself to be able to make, because there's an energetic cost that comes with that, right? With context switching, with needing to strategically reset with that regularity. If you don't look after yourself through that, it's going to be very challenging to maintain the high level of performance that's demanded in your roles. And I do want to talk about, we've touched on culture and performance a little bit. I'd love to dig in a little bit deeper and talk about how you're building it. Kerry, you've got a global footprint across your organisation, and I'm interested around the work you're doing to build consistent cultural moments across that global footprint, and how you've approached that through kind of the employee experience and the leadership behaviour side of things. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have about 90,000 people around the world, and we have very different businesses within our company. We run retail operations, many of which are here in the US, to wind farms, to oil and gas production. It's kind of everything everywhere in a way, and very different types of employees. So from that perspective, I think the first thing is you have to think about what's right from what context. And it doesn't always mean that everything has to be the same. And that's the journey we've been on, because we started in an environment where many things were different. We went to an environment where we tried to make everything the same, and now we've come to probably the place we should have been, which was there's some stuff that needs to be the same and some stuff that needs to be different. But it goes back to some of what Kelly was saying around leadership for me. So I think there's two things around consistent moments. One is making sure that you've got authentic leaders and building authentic leaders, because at the end of the day, any moment for an employee is very largely impacted by the teams they work with and the leaders they work for. So we've invested heavily in building leaders in our company, similar to the work that Kelly was describing. And then it's about, consistent moments. So whether that's performance, whether it's reward, we work obviously with workhuman around recognition, and they've been brilliant partners for us around performance. But it's also been recognizing what needs to change, actually. So we do have many great leaders. We also have some great tools, and we have some consistent and simple processes. But we're also now changing, because our context is changing. And one of the things I'm really focused on is driving performance across the company. So what we've come to the conclusion of is actually we need to shift how we manage performance, and we're in the middle of that right now.
At a high level, can you talk to us about what that shift looks like?
Yeah, it does. So we went to a model in 2020, before the pandemic, where it was kind of one size fits all. Everyone in the company was rewarded by by the company goals. What we realise now is actually we want something quite different, because we know individuals tend to be more energised and motivated when they can see direct line of sight between the company goals and what they're actually focused on. So we are ensuring we have better line of sight there and more sort of sub-entity focus, so that depending on where you are in the company, you've got line of sight to the entity outcomes and then rewarded accordingly. So again, you'll be rewarded both on company outcomes and on individual outcomes. So and none of this is rocket science. You know, when you describe it like that, it feels pretty simple, but I think it's about what's right. We need to drive performance. We've shifted our strategy. We announced a new strategy in February, so we are increasing production, and we are focusing our downstream operations as well as our low carbon assets. And this is about making sure that we can deliver for the future and we can create a successful company. And I just want to shout out actually to workhuman, because in the past what we would have done was we would have taken time to do that. We've said, you know what, we're already started the performance year, let's wait till the beginning of January. We'll get it all 100% sorted and then we'll be off. What we've done now is we've said, you know what, nothing's ever going to be perfect. We just need to get moving, we need to drive some of these different outcomes. And our partnership here has really helped us, because it's the performance system that we operate is a workhuman system.
That's great. Kelly, speaking of kind of moments, recognition, reward, I know something in Cisco you've been very intentional about doing is linking that recognition to purpose and performance. Can you speak about your organisation's journey with that?
Sure. So we have a platform we call Connected Cisco, which is a little bit about how we do recognition through the lens of both peer-to-peer and leader-to-peer, and we partner with workhuman on that. And it is a great program. You know, we set this up, and one of the things that we started looking at was our data internally around what does this tell us? You know, when people actually use this system, you know, what does it tell us about their performance? What does it tell us about retention? And one of the things that we've seen overwhelmingly is it's not even the dollar amount that you do in recognition. I think the number that started to drive high engagement was like $20. You know, it's literally taking your friend to Starbucks. It's not about the money, it's about the moment that matters to the employee. And when we made it peer-to-peer, it's really powerful that way. It's not just leader-to-peer, it's peer-to-peer. And it's interesting, our leaders had a little push against that because they felt like they wanted to control those budgets. And we kind of said no, you know, because you don't always see everything that happens up and down the stack and when people are really driving an impact. So that was a really powerful part of it. But the other thing we did, so we have it connected to our Cisco guiding principles. So we have a set of guiding principles at Cisco. Our recognition program is attached to that. But another way we get at it through purpose is through what I would call kind of the community impact side of Cisco. And you touched on this earlier when we were speaking backstage. I think the community impact piece is so important because what we see in this connection to purpose and values is when we talk about what is the impact to our customers, people see it. You know, and the customers can be internal or external. And so what we try to do is bring those customer journey stories externally into Cisco, but also internally. So when our people team does things and it impacts our internal customers, the 90,000 employees that we have, we try to make sure that we're highlighting those stories and drawing that impact for people, both in how we recognize them and in how we speak about them.
Both of you touched on leadership there, and I feel like it's too good an opportunity with folks of your caliber to not ask the question that I think many in the room are grappling with, which is how do you get that leadership buy-in around some of these changes that you're wanting to see so that it can really take hold culturally as opposed to be something that's driven on your shoulders or by your team. Any tips or ways you've gone about telling the story, navigating, getting stakeholder buy-in that you've learned on your journey that you think have been really enabling you to be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, Holly. So for me,
I did watch you laugh, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Well, it's
There's
been
probably some challenging backstories.
There are a few backstories. I could spend all day talking about it, but it's been a challenge. And I described earlier, my personality type a bit, which is, come on, let's get this done, and let's just go. But I work in an engineering company by and large, very precise,
data,
very focused, lots of data, very systematic, and I personally often operate on gut feel as much as on data. So that's been a journey. But what I will say is we just changed our strategy, and actually at the end of the day, if you pin it back to what the company needs to achieve, what your shareholders want, and what you need from your people in service of that strategy delivery, then generally speaking, that's the way to go. And so it's, for me, all about making those connections, ensuring that people understand what we're trying to drive for and our strategy, and communicating that effectively, and then just linking some of these things back to performance. It's like the change in our performance structure and process I just mentioned. That's all about in service of value for the company and growth for the company and delivering our strategy. And actually, we might have in the past been debating it quite significantly. Now it's like, come on, let's go. And so I do think it's all about context, and it's about what is it you're trying to achieve, and just really, focusing on that.
And making it clear this isn't a nice to have, this is a business imperative.
Completely, it's a business imperative. Yeah, if you've got a real need to change, then don't waste it.
Kelly, how about for you? Anything to add into the mix for those that are navigating, trying to get that broader buy-in?
Yeah, I would say everything you said deeply resonated with me when I think about what we're trying to do at Cisco. The only thing I would add that we've seen work pretty well is we bring these things to life through our employees and their stories, not through the HR lens. So I've got some of my Cisco HR team here in the room today. My team worked on the guiding principles for Cisco. So the ones we have were built organically with data, listening to our teams, listening to our leaders inside out. But when we launched them to the company, it was not a people team thing. Our CEO launched them. And so when we talk about them, we don't talk about them through the lens of this is a people thing or a culture thing. This is a business imperative. And we launch it through stories from our leaders and from our employees. And we find that resonates because people don't feel like they're being talked at by HR or by a people team, but they're hearing from their peers.
I want to talk to you both about leading through disruption. You've both been in your roles, and we've already mentioned a multitude of disruptions, whether we're talking about AI, the pandemic. We had a big conversation on our DE&I panel yesterday afternoon around the kind of existential threat it feels like that part of the work is under at this moment in time. I'm interested to get your insights around what you've learned through leading through disruption. And Kerry, maybe you first. Can you share with us, doesn't have to be the pandemic, you pick your kind of critical decision moment where you're responding to an external challenge or threat, and sort of how it's changed your perspective on leadership or adaptation, effective adaptation?
Yeah, no, thank you. And there've been a lot of it. In the last 15 years I've been in the company. Our industry in energy is often impacted very much by geopolitics, by what's going on around the world in the environments in which we operate. I've had to deal with a number of things. I mean, a terrorist attack, for example, on one of our operations, let alone COVID and everything else that we've just mentioned. I think the thing I would highlight, probably one experience for me, and it was about courageous leadership, and I would say doing what needed to be done, doing the right thing and not always the easiest thing. I think back to 22, the invasion of the Ukraine, and that was a big issue for the world, but it was also a very big issue for our company because we'd operated in Russia for 30 years. We had a big operation there, and we had to take action, and we had to do it quickly. And what guided us was less about the business, but it was more about our people. It was about our people and taking care of them. And so we had to swing into action because we realized that what we were experiencing wasn't aligned to the company that we were. And so the first thing was to get all of our people out of Russia, and in fact also offer jobs to some of our local employees who might want to leave and go work elsewhere. And so that was actually to some degree controversial, depending on who you were and positions. But I think what I would say is it was all about doing what was right for our people. It was all about what's aligned to the values of our company. We put our people first. Of course, business is important, but at the end of the day, in that type of scenario, business comes second. And it was really about dealing with that as a challenge. What is it that we say about our company? And one of our values is that we care for people, we care for others.
Yeah. Are we serious about it?
Are we serious about it? Because these are the moments that matter. And it wasn't just the people who work in that country, it was also our employees in Poland who were on the borders and who were taking others into work in our retail operations, for example. So for me, it was about aligning to our values. It was about speaking up and saying the things that sometimes other people didn't want to hear. And so for me, I would say that's probably one of the toughest challenges we faced. But I can sit back now and say, I know we did the right thing.
Your comment around how you needed to build kind of courage and resilience as a muscle now makes even more sense in the context of that story, like how challenging that would have been to navigate. We've talked a lot through the workhuman program around the importance of doing the right thing, coming back to care, meaning, purpose. Kelly, love for your build on that, but I'd also love your lens on, as a leader, how you galvanise your people during times of disruption, thinking about that kind of protecting your team and helping them navigate difficult times.
Yeah. First of all, I love that strand around moral courage, because I think leadership without moral courage is just weak tea. For those of you that have ever lived in the South, it's just weak tea.
Or in the UK.
Or in the UK, yeah. Even more so. So that resonates with me a lot. I think when I look at my team, we're all in a unique space in this room because we do this work day in and day out, and we try to manage this for the company, and it's easy sometimes to forget to manage it for yourself. So one thing that I've always tried to stay focused on in bringing my teams, as they support the company through a lot of this disruption, is making sure that I'm not just managing the work, but I'm really managing the energy of the teams. And I do that by ensuring that I'm communicating often and inclusively. Communicating and listening. Because oftentimes, when you're in these times of disruption, I find that our employees want to know where we stand. Where are we on this? How do we feel about this? This is the moral courage part. Your culture comes to life through what you do, not what you say. And so, these moments of being able to communicate often and inclusively about who you are and where you stand on these things is very important. But then also just the managing of the energy. And that for me is a balance of speaking and listening. Making sure the teams understand that you have their back, for anything that they need. But also making sure you're very clear on where it is your teams are. Because for the leaders in this room, if you lead HR teams, you might have noticed we always put ourselves last. And I wasn't in the Brene Brown session, but I did hear, the oxygen mask example. It's such a powerful one. You can't put yourselves last in this, and you can't put your teams last in this. You have to remember that they're also employees. And that's what I say to my leaders all the time. This people team that we have that shepherds through these difficult times, they're also our employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the language that's emerging around moral courage in this conversation too. It makes me think of the great explorer Shackleton. He also talked about the idea that optimism is an act of moral courage. And I often think sometimes in disruption, you've spoken about narrative and the importance of sort of how we show up for our people, and that act of being able to be hopeful and being optimistic is actually part of that moral courage in the face of adversity too.
Yeah, it's a component for resilience. If you're not optimistic, then you can't remain resilient.
That all starts there, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Absolutely. I'd love to pick both of your brains around where the puck's going, for want of a non-sporting analogy, in terms of the future and what's around the corner, because I know you're people who think deeply about how the profession's changing and what you need to get ahead of. Kerry, maybe you first on this one. When you think about skills and kind of the top capacities HR leaders are going to need to build, we talked yesterday with Adam about the soft skill piece.
Yeah.
What is it that's going to remain kind of core human competency as AI continues to take over more and more functionality inside organisations? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think deeply about what is it that my team need to develop as we move forward. And I just repeat what we've said to a degree, which is that piece around resilience, not knowing what's coming around the corner has to be number one, because without that you can't move on to the other stuff.
Can I ask you a practical question on that? Because I think it's one of those terms we use a lot.
Yeah.
It's that challenging thing around how do you build it in people? Can you hire for it? How do we develop that competency if it's going to be that future critical? Can you say more about how you've thought about that practically?
It's interesting you asked that question, because I've been wondering myself.
Yeah.
I've been asking myself that question is, what is it that makes some people more resilient than others? What is it that it takes to become more resilient? And I don't know that I have the exact answer. I think the point is, it comes back to this oxygen mask question. You're always going to have stuff to deal with. It doesn't matter what that stuff is, and you're always going to be challenged. But if you know how to deal with it when it comes your way, and you know when to step back, look after yourself, then I think that's over time what makes you more resilient. I don't know, I'm open to ears. If anyone's got any better ideas, I think there's a book in there somewhere. But yeah, so I do think that's important, and I think the piece around courage just forever will be something that we as a function need to continue to be able to speak up around. But beyond that, as I've been talking to my team, we're going through a huge amount of transformation right now. I'm kind of redesigning everything that we do and where we do work and how we do work. And what I've said to them is AI, digital skills. However we shape ourselves for the future, we all need to be as literate in understanding the new technologies as the next person in our tech team in the business. And right now, I'm not sure, certainly in my team, that we're quite there yet. I go to events like this and others where, that's the subject everybody's talking about all of the time. And so, I'm making sure each week I'm putting aside a couple of hours to, learn for myself, because if I don't lead the way, then that's not going to help anybody. So I'd say that's number one. And then secondly, is this whole notion of really sort of skills as our currency. How do we make sure that we are just building skills for the future so that we can adapt and grow and learn? I can ask people to learn certain technology skills, but actually at the end of the day, it's how you use those in different contexts and how flexible you are, because we just don't know what's around the corner.
The second time we've heard AI literacy in this conversation, what I love is that piece too around that personal practice and the discipline of making sure we're doing it, because we have to be it in order to see it. So I think that's a great piece around that. We're putting that time aside to experiment, something else we talked about, and to be learning every week given how important this is going to be. Kelly, love your build on what Kerry said there. But I know you mentioned AI earlier. I'm interested in the applications that you're thinking about for things like employee experience, inclusion, operational excellence, parts of your portfolio. Where are you seeing it, early use cases for how that can add value?
Yeah, so we're looking at pretty much everything across the entire talent stack, but the use cases that we're putting in right now, one of the ones I'm probably the most excited about, back to my quoting our CIO around everybody has a Chuck Robbins experience, is that we're putting something into our internal tool. We have a tool called Bridget. Many of you probably have it. It's our internal AI platform. We're basically taking all of our publicly available people information, putting it into that tool, and creating almost like a people business partner in the pocket for everyone. We're a large company. We have a big website. Things are everywhere. And so we're trying to get it a lot cleaner, so you can not only get the things, questions asked and answered, but you can perform tasks. And this is going to be really interesting. So you can actually go into Bridget and say, how many days off have I taken this year? Oh, Kelly, you've taken 4. Would you like to enter a day? Yes, I'd like to enter a day. You put in the day. It will actually go to the system, enter the day for you, and then kind of come back and say, would you like to generate a letter to your leader letting them know that you're going to be out and you want me to send that letter? Yes. And so what we're trying to do is take the answer set that we're in phase 2 of the pilot for the answer set now. And my very practical advice to you is don't even do this until your data is ready. Because we did a big data cleanup on this, and this is the not sexy part of AI. Everybody talks about the sexy part, but like your data's got to be good or this will not work. So take the time and clean up your data, put the work in to do that. Our first round out, I think we had 70% accurate answers. That's with the data cleanup, so do the data cleanup. So that one I'm really excited about. But we're also looking at some other things when we think about learning and skilling. We are going to be having applications that at any given moment kind of give you these micro bursts of learning and skilling aligned to your skills and your skills development kind of within the flow of work. And so that's one that I'm really excited about. It's a little bit on the longer term horizon. And then we've also got things that we're putting into place around, I mentioned AI coaching earlier, and WebEx has an AI agent that I love for leaders, because what it actually does is, during the meeting, it will analyze, like your facial, if you have it on, your facial features, how much you talk. We talked about leaders earlier and how many of them are good and how many of them are not. And it'll give you coaching at the end of the meeting, and it'll say, Bob, you talked a lot more than you listened in that, and you had 3 opportunities to harvest an idea from your team that you missed.
There's applause for that in the corner. Some people that are writing that down, so we've got to get that in my organisation. And I love that point. Eric mentioned this on stage yesterday, but data is key. If we're going to talk about AI, we're going to have that conversation around data, because garbage in equals garbage out, and so that work that needs to be done in this phase to make sure you get the right data sets, clean, credible, quality data sets is going to be absolutely instrumental. The question for either or both of you, just how you're thinking about bringing AI into your organisations and balancing that kind of human-centred approach. You're people that are clearly passionate about people. You can tell that's why you got into this line of work. I think some people struggle with that part of this revolution in particular, is it feels like we're going to lose some of the essence of what makes our organisations great places to work and what makes our culture special. Any thoughts on that and just how you're thinking about that as a leader?
Yeah, I think if I can just say, Holly, for me, the AI is what gives us better insights to have those human conversations. So, just thinking about how we use AI today to integrate all of our people analytics and all sources of data that we have around the people in our company, that's what gives me the ability to think about how is an individual being impacted today, right down to, smaller individual levels, bigger organizational levels, and I can then do what I do best, which is have the right conversations, influence discussions, and I just think that this is the kind of balance that we need to be mindful of. Now, who knows, right, where the future's going to take us?
Sure.
Maybe all of these AI tools are going to take on some of these human aspects, but like you were saying, Kelly, with the WebEx example. So I guess we're getting there, but right now I think it's about using them as tools to do what we do best, which is impact the people who work for us.
So enhance the human experience.
Completely.
Yep. Kelly, for you?
That 100% resonates with me, and the only thing I would add is, we're all in on AI at Cisco, both in our product line and within our people team and the processes. I have early adopters, I have skeptics. You'll have both on your team. You might be an early adopter or a skeptic. I'm trying to get more people to the early adoption side, but one of the things I found that makes a real difference is ensuring that the conversation is not just about productivity, and it's not just about we can do this cheaper, we can do this cheaper. It's got to be about how do you make the experience better for the humans that work in your company. And so everybody on my team cares deeply about that. So ensuring that as we're mapping these processes, the focus is not necessarily how do we get a bunch of money out of the system. The focus is how do we uplift the collective experience and performance of our teams. And the way we have to do that, or what we need to do in order to do that, is not just layer AI on top of everything we're doing. You actually have to look at all your processes and figure out where does this process need to change? Where can AI make this process better? And you kind of have to have that front to back understanding of your employee journey.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate both of you for how candid you've been and how practical with the insights you've offered and the way that your organisations are approaching the topics we've talked about. But one question before I let you go, which is we're deep in 2025, people are already kind of planning for 26 and beyond. As you think about the future of work and the role that leaders in the room, HR professionals, and leaders in this profession can play in shaping it, what's one bold move? What's a conversation you think we need to be sparking, a discomfort we need to be leaning into as we've got our eyes to the future? Kerry, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. A big part of our jobs is all about making sure we've got the right talent in the right place when you need it, regardless. So I think the thing I would double down on is the conversation around apprenticeships. It is something coming from London that is more a discussion in the UK, but and in Europe. But I believe, and we've started this in our US operations as well. I believe that you've got to provide opportunities for people, regardless of their backgrounds, wherever they come from, and not everybody has the opportunity to go to college and to get a degree. So the more companies like ours can do to provide different pathways to the world of work, I think the better we will become, because you bring different voices, different perspectives, and you open up that aperture to opportunity for everyone.
Absolutely, love that. Excellent, Kelly.
First of all, I love that too. I'm doing a Me Too moment here with you. I absolutely love that as well, because I think that when you break the tyranny of pedigree and you just look at skills and capabilities, you build a better workforce. And in addition to that, to your original question about what's one bold thing I think we all need to do, I think we need to break this idea that your title and your level in an organization is your currency. And I think organizations need to start looking at skills and capabilities as currency. And we need to build AI-ready workforces with internal talent markets that, yes, are partially augmented, but are also still deeply human in many ways, that breaks this idea of your title or your level determines the role you get to do. It should be your skills and your capabilities, degree or no degree.
Yeah, fantastic. What great, rich, good thoughts to finish our conversation.